Hey everybody, Dr. Joan Ifland here. Get ready for hope. Get ready for new information and for a way of understanding how diabetes is treated so that you can have hope of managing your diabetes to the greatest extent possible. We're going to be talking mostly today about type 2 diabetes, but we are also getting results in stabilizing blood glucose with type 1. So if you're type 1, hang in here. The research that we're going to show you is applicable to type 1. Type 1 does not go into remission, but you can improve type 1 outcomes and protect yourself from the consequences. So here we go. Thank you so much for coming today. This is 4 steps to understanding how to put type 2 into remission and improve outcomes for type 1. We're going to redefine the problem. What is the diabetes problem? Step 2, decide what you might get if you decide to pursue remission and protection from consequences. 3, understand why nothing else has worked so that you can relieve yourself of the guilt, the self-blame. And step 4, decide how to begin. Step 1, we're going to be looking at why do people believe that diabetes is incurable? Is it true? What's the evidence? And we're going to ask the question, is diabetes actually a sign of intense, overwhelming cravings for processed foods? Why do people believe that diabetes can only be slowed and not put into remission? Because the diabetes educators tell us that. And because people have been given programs to improve diabetes and they have failed. So these things reinforce this belief that diabetes is incurable, that the consequences are inevitable, which is just not true. And a big answer that we're going to be looking at again and again today is, why do programs fail? So is the reason why the program fails because it's not the right program, or it's not a strong enough program? Or is it because, well, diabetes is incurable? Today, we're going to be showing you the evidence that it's because the program was not strong enough. Diabetes can be put into remission. I've seen it happen again and again in our online processed food recovery communities. And so this is why I'm excited that you're here and that you're going to get hope. Is it true? No. Is it true that diabetes is incurable, or does the medical industry make that claim because they don't offer adequate programs? Or do people think it's incurable because they've tried programs that didn't work? What's the evidence? The evidence is that there could be a hidden addiction to processed foods fostered by the tobacco/food industry, and that this is driving cravings that are so intense that we continue to eat foods that cause diabetes, the processed foods that cause diabetes, that in that cascade cause the insulin resistance, cause the inflammation, all of the factors that lead to the development of diabetes. And here is the most important evidence. An intense intervention is needed. You know, a once-a-week meeting is not going to do it. A 6-week program is not going to do it. Even a 1-year program is not going to do it if you go back out into our mainstream culture where everybody's eating processed foods. Your urge to fit in, which is a basic survival mechanism, will drag you back to eating processed foods and redeveloping the diabetes. So unless the program is a very easy to use, oh, I just turn it on like I turn on television, and it becomes a part of your life for the rest of your life, then yes, the culture is going to pull you back into eating processed foods. So is diabetes actually, now we're redefining the problem, is diabetes actually a consequence of intense overwhelming cravings for processed foods. That is what the evidence is showing us. So diabetes is not your fault. And if your diabetes is not under your control, that is also not your fault. Big Tobacco bought the major food processors in the mid-1980s. They bought Kraft Nabisco and General Foods in 3 short years, and they brought their expertise in nicotine addiction, tobacco addiction, they brought that over to sugar, fat, salt. And they hid tons of sugar, fat, salt in processed foods. They gave us lots of coupons so that we would use those processed foods frequently, develop the addiction, develop the cravings, those overwhelming cravings, and develop the consequences then of eating processed foods. Americans eat 73% of their foods in processed foods. And we're having an epidemic of diabetes. Those two things go hand in glove. The citation here is an article that I wrote. You guys know I have a business background. I have a Stanford MBA, and I study business models, and this is what happened to us. This is what the evidence supports, that big tobacco brought addiction to processed foods to us, and that we are experiencing that as very, very intense cravings. All right, so let's take step 2. Now we've redefined the problem. The problem is not that, oh, we just happen to get diabetes. No, the problem is the tobacco food industry gave us intense cravings that overwhelm our desire to quit eating that stuff and put our diabetes into remission. So let's look at, if you decide to undertake a diabetes remission program, what would you get? I mean, how can you decide whether to do something until you know what you would get out of it? So if you stick with the kind of the traditional medical industry approach, their approach is to slow down the progress of the diabetes, slow down the consequences. They don't have a remission pathway. They only have a slowing down pathway. So if you choose to stay with the traditional approach and slow it down, what are the consequences of that versus going into a remission pathway? And again, we're going to look at the evidence. So what happens on the medical industry path? Well, we see from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, that their lifespan is likely to be 6 years shorter than a non-diabetic. You will be suffering consequences of physical, mental, and emotional problems. But what else might go into remission? This is, again, from that same website. Over time, high blood glucose leads to problems such as heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, eye problems, dental disease, nerve damage, and foot problems. So there's quite a bit at stake. This is the medical industry model says we're going to slow this down. And so it delays the onset of complications such as this list. What I am giving you hope about is that there is a different pathway. It uses the traditional medical approach, but it adds on recovery approaches that I have seen, and the evidence supports the idea that you can put diabetes into full remission. So the evidence is this: processed foods are the problem. Stopping intense food cravings is the answer to stopping consumption of processed foods. And it is the processed foods that create the diabetes. All right, why don't other approaches work? Well, because traditional approaches miss the opportunity to eliminate processed foods. Processed foods, particularly processed carbohydrates, cause are absorbed into the blood all at once, and that's where you get the high glucose from. And that's where the complications of all those other diseases come from. That high glucose can't fit through tiny capillaries, and it actually breaks the capillaries. It breaks the capillaries in the back of the eye, in the retina, which leads to blindness. It breaks the capillaries in the kidneys, which leads to kidney failure. And it makes the blood too thick to reach the feet. So then you start having amputations. So these traditional approaches, they're not working with you on cravings triggers. They're not giving you constant access for stress and problem solving, which prevents cravings. They're not protecting you from food industry practices that promote cravings. And let's look at the evidence. So I went to the website for the diabetes educators, and they completely miss this finding that cravings trigger loss of control. And that's very clear in the research. The diabetes educator website doesn't include any training for avoiding or neutralizing food cues. So this is why, if you've been in a traditional program, it hasn't worked. Avoiding the triggers that cause the flood of cravings and lead to using processed foods, which we know are the precursors to diabetes. If you don't have that cue management training, you can't hope to put diabetes into remission. That is not just my opinion. That is from lining up the research and connecting the dots. So stress is a huge relapse trigger. And what does the diabetes educator website offer? They will help you with problem solving. But that's like 1/10 of what is actually needed. These intense cravings have come from, we now have been subjected to the tobacco food cravings model. Just pump those cravings into your head. Eat that processed foods, develop these terrible consequences, and be unable to stop. Well, if you're that deep into being manipulated by the tobacco food industry, I have found that constant access, 24-hour a day, access to being around people who can walk you through, who can calm you down, who can stop the panic, who can avert the crisis. Being around wise, calm people turns out to be the answer. So we're going to come to our programs, but that's the answer, is that we offer 15 hours a day of Zoom programming and private messenger groups and our Facebook group, so that you can get connection 24 hours a day, not always live, 15 hours a day live around the clock in blocks. You never have to wait more than a couple of hours to be talking to somebody who can walk you through a crisis or a panic or a problem, so that you don't have to eat over it. And the diabetes educator website doesn't tell you how to avoid the tobacco food manipulation. They focus on compliance with medication. They want you to take that medication. So you just got to look at, where do diabetes educators come from? They're educated by the dietitians who are educated by the processed food industry. So they're not going to tell you all of the skills. They're not going to give you all the skills that it takes to avoid and recover from and establish new thought patterns and habits to extract ourselves from the manipulations of the tobacco food industries. Now, this is really hard to watch, but over the 27 years at this point, I started in 1996. Since 1996, I've been researching what are processed foods, what processed foods cause problems. We know that these I should say trigger alert. Just plug your ears for the next minute if you're sensitive to triggers. But the Diabetes Educator website actually advocates addictive processed foods like bread, cereal, pasta, dried fruit, dairy, and nuts. Dairy, we know dairy, for example, turns on the weight gain gene. Dairy is a substance right out of the organic cow that is designed to put 500 pounds on a calf in 1 year. But the dairy industry supports the processed food industry, which supports the dietitians, which supports the diabetes educators. Here it is. Here's the research. Here's the research. The more processed foods, the greater the risk of diabetes. This is a study done in 2021. Ultra-processed food consumption and adult diabetes risk, a systematic review and dose response meta-analysis. This is a huge review of other studies. And the risk of getting diabetes, this is what this graph is showing. The risk of diabetes increases with the amount of processed foods that you're eating. So for example, if you're eating 25% of your foods in ultra-processed foods, you don't have increased risk of diabetes. But if you're eating 70% of your food, you have a, let's see, it looks like about a 30% greater chance of developing diabetes. This is not hard to understand. And we know that processed foods put a burden on the insulin receptor cells, on fat cells and liver cells, and that those receptors wear out under the bombardment of needing to manage the glucose levels from processed foods. It's very easy to understand. So Americans, I just want to show you where Americans are today. Americans are eating 73% of their food in processed foods. And we have an epidemic of diabetes. Duh. This is not you. This graph just shows clearly this is not you. Our government here in the US is standing by and letting the processed food industry addict us. It pushes it, it makes it available, it's very cheap, and it's killing us. So if you have any doubt in your mind what causes diabetes, just think about this graph. Okay, so diabetes educators, they do talk about reducing use of processed foods, but reducing use of processed foods does not stop cravings. It's the elimination of processed foods and the immersion in a recovery program where you get all the skills that you need to stop eating processed foods and go to bed on time and move your body and have healthy relationships. All of those require a tremendous amount of skill and especially cue avoidance and neutralization, training your brain not to respond to food cues or stress cues. Now, here's something that's very important because this just makes my stomach hurt. The bariatric surgery industry is claiming that bariatric surgery impacts diabetes. And it does initially in some cases, not all cases, but then the effects fade. Within 10 years, you're right back to where you started because you haven't addressed the cravings. Bariatric surgery, of course, carries risks. I can't tell you how many people I've talked about who've had to go back in and get more surgery for complications. And here's the thing, its effectiveness wanes. It wears off. It might take 10 years. But why not just start with a remission program rather than a risky surgery that's the benefits are going to wear off and you're going to be right back where you started, except that you now have this altered stomach. People do regain the lost weight. And this study here, there are two of them. One showing, they're both showing the loss. Well, wait, it's the Velopati, weight regain after bariatric surgery. It's just, it happens. Weight comes back after bariatric surgery. And then the Lingve is a rapid improvement after diabetes, after gastric bypass surgery. Is it the diet or the surgery? It's the diet. So you can fix your diet without having to, so just terribly alter your stomach. Okay, so here's the evidence. Cravings come from a deeply embedded addiction to processed foods fostered by the tobacco food industry. Diabetes comes from processed foods. Put processed food cravings into remission. To put diabetes into remission, or in the case of type 1, protect against consequences. You just got to connect the dots. All right, so what does work? Let's get happy here. Let's find some joy. Surround comfort, surround support, surround wisdom, surround I'm doing that because they're doing that urge to fit in. So eliminating cravings, getting control over food, putting diabetes into remission. In my 27 years of experience and my reading of thousands of studies, you need protection from stress in a safe, easy to use online environment, and you need the skills to stop reacting to food cues. And here is a good study by Lean. No irony there. Durability of a primary care-led weight management intervention for remission of type 2 diabetes. 2-year results of the direct open-label cluster randomized trial. So this is what they learned. It's got to be an intense program, but you can do it. So what is an intense program? What does surround comfort do? Surround comfort means that you are protected from stress and cueing. You have a safe space in which to get your feet on the ground. You have a safe space in which to develop the skills to be able to say no and say it consistently, just to protect yourself from those cravings. What do you need? 24-hour resources. You might wake up during the night. And we have teams around the world that are running that 15 hours a day of programming. We run it in blocks. There's a block of programming and then a break. And so if you have a crisis during the break, you don't have to wait long until another program comes on. 24 hours. If you wake up during the night, you need to be able to open your screen or get out a video or listen to a recorded podcast and bring your calmness back over you. So what does work is educating people about cravings. Where do they come from? What do they do? And really deep explanations for why this is not your fault. This is corporate manipulation. It's well documented. We have internal documents from the tobacco industry describing in detail how they plan to addict children to sugar. It's just very hard to read. You need skills to protect against cravings, loss of control, and regretted eating. And I think you need the opportunity to train to help others. There's nothing that reinforces a program better than teaching it to somebody else. And we've got all kinds of trainings for you. Even if you are coming in the worst case, you have diabetes and their food is completely out of control, that is a great time to start a training, because as you learn how to help yourself, you're also developing the ability to explain that experience to somebody else. So we also offer a lot of modalities that are beyond the medical industry. I'm reading a very interesting book right now, Healthy No Matter What. And I think their position is that the medical industry covers about 20% of what you can do, And there's another 80% that is not pharmaceutical, not surgery, but works really well. So we have a community that has organized all of this for you. The Remission Optimistic Community, or the ROC, gives you surround support. Now, we do this in partnership with our original community, the Addiction Reset Community, or the ARC. So the ARC does some things and the ROC does the rest. The ARC is where you process emotions, you get your own assigned advocate, and you're in that advocates group. You have small groups, you have specialty groups, you have a daily ARC email newsletter, you have a daily podcast, you have a confidential ARC Facebook group, and you have an activity center open 24 hours a day. So you're surrounded by resources. So what you get in the ROC is lots and lots of choices, lots of availability. This is why the ROC and the ARC are successful, in my opinion, because you choose how much ARC time or ROC time you want in a day. You're having a bad day, you can just sit there in the afternoon and listen in and get lots and lots of surround support. You're having a great day and you've got a bunch of stuff to do. You can listen to it in the background, or you can just say, I'm good today. If something happens during the day and you change your mind, you can come in. You are not ever required to be anywhere. But we offer you 2 Zoom health creation meetings per day. Twice a day, I go to these meetings because I'm putting asthma into remission. I'm 71 years old and I'm doing great with it. It's getting better and better. You can come to 2 hours a day and listen to other people creating health and take their ideas or leave the ones that don't work for you. There are trained people running these meetings. This is not an amateur operation. They are working towards their food addiction recovery advocate certification. They are ARC managers, and they are incredible. You can also choose from 4 hours a day of healing modalities. These are modalities for which we have evidence that they do work to accomplish staying calm, keeping control of your food, meditation, visualization, breath work, qigong. These are all things that we offer, and you choose. You do not have to come to them. You get an extensive resource sheet with lots and lots of resources for the medical industry types of services and services outside the medical industry. And then we have a ROC Facebook group. So the ROC fits into your schedule no matter how much time you have, because you can play it in the background and it will help orient your brain to what you want to do to create health. But this is also why it works, is because it's very convenient. It's very flexible. You don't have to come to anything, but it's always there, always there, always there, always there. And your brain creates tremendous security from being surrounded by wise people who are prioritizing creating health. This is very different from our outside culture where they're prioritizing these delusions about processed foods. Join in more on days when you need it. Do other things on days when you don't need it. It's fun to meet people in your ROC. It's very easy. It's a small group. Each ROC is limited to 25 people. Just works. It's fun, easy. And we empower you to figure out your own best food plan. We've got resources for you outside of the ROC and the ARC. And we also have training so that you can gather data on the best food plan for you. And we'll walk you through that. So book an interview with us. Get more information. You can book an interview with us by writing to Get Help at foodaddictionreset.com. And you'll meet with a member of the ROC outreach staff, and you'll find out how to make diabetes remission work in your life. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We are worldwide. We have teams in Europe and Africa. We have teams across the Americas. We have teams in the Pacific. We're helping people around the world get off of processed foods and recover from diet-related diseases. You can visit us at remissionoptimistic.com. And you, as I said, you can train as a food addiction recovery advocate. That website is foodaddictionrecoveryadvocate.com. Foodaddictionrecoveryadvocate.com. And as I said, you can email us at gethelp@foodaddictionreset.com. Dang, I hope I see you. I want to see you. I have been in this to win it since 1996. I have seen diabetes go into remission. I've got 3 cases right now, active cases of people who are putting diabetes into remission. And I want you to have this experience too. Just know that we do have scholarships for the ROC, and we will make sure that no matter what your financial situation is, we'll find a solution for you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Please share this. Diabetes is a terrible disease, and there's lots and lots of help for it. I appreciate you, and I care about you.